From Morocco, by the dispatches of the evening, Abd el-Krim, the man who destroyed a Spanish army at Annual and raised a republic in the mountains of the Rif, is tonight in the hands of France. 5 years of war against one empire and then against two together are at their end. From Beirut, the new Lebanese republic has its first president, chosen under the same French mandate whose aircraft we lately reported over Damascus. And from Washington, a committee of the United States Senate sat today upon the matter of the Passaic textile strike. The strikers of Passaic have their hearing at last. And in New York, the fur workers, under the same kind of leadership, hold a strike of their own into its 4th month. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Wednesday, the 26th of May, 1926. A war has ended tonight in the mountains of North Africa. Abd el-Krim, the judge's son who made himself master of the Rif, has surrendered. The first dispatches reached the wires today. He has given himself up to the French command in the field. It was Spain whose army he destroyed, and Spain whose memory of that destruction is longest. He has put himself in the hands of the other empire, and the terms of his keeping are not yet settled. The Rif Republic he proclaimed and led, the mountain state that stood against Spain alone and then against Spain and France together, is finished. We reported in our last dispatch that the peace talks at Oujda had broken down and the combined offensive had resumed. Tonight, that offensive has its conclusion. It did not end in a parley. By the reports of these past days, the approach came first from the Rif side, an offer carried through intermediaries for an end to the fighting. And the answer out of Paris was that the fighting would continue until the surrender was complete, made without conditions, and made by the man himself in person. Premier Briand, those same reports have it, would have it understood that the chief of the Rif was no longer a power with whom France would treat, not a belligerent to be granted terms, but a rebel to be received. There was to be no armistice that might be read afterward as a draw between equals, no formula by which the mountains might save their face. The submission was to be complete and seen to be complete. 5 years ago, his name was little known beyond the Rif itself. By the time France took the field against him, it was a name carried in the European press and spoken of wherever men watched to see whether a mountain people could humble an empire. Tonight, that question has its answer, and the answer is the one the empires meant it to be. The war began in earnest in the summer of 1921 with one of the greatest disasters European arms have ever suffered in the colonial war. The Spanish command in eastern Morocco had pushed a line of small posts deep into the mountains, 135 positions strung out far from the coast, on poor tracks, short of water, with a thin reserve behind them. The advance had outrun everything that sustains an army, and the officers who said so were not listened to. In July, the Riffians closed upon the forward post of Igueri Ben, hard by the main camp at Annual. The relief columns failed. The garrison tried to break out, and of some 300 men, perhaps 30 came through. The next morning, Annual itself was ordered abandoned, and within a few hundred meters of the camp, the withdrawal became a rout. The cavalry rode itself nearly to destruction, covering the men who ran. What remained of the command fell back at last upon Monte Arouit, where some 3,000 were surrounded. Some 10 days later, they capitulated. And after the capitulation, they were massacred. The inquiry the army itself conducted put the dead of that summer near 13,000. The figure was disputed in the Cortes from the day it was set down. The scale was disputed by no one. And the guns the Spanish army abandoned in that retreat became the artillery of the Rif. Abd el-Krim built upon the victory. By 1924, his forces held most of Spanish Morocco, and they were not a horde. A drilled regular corps, the tribal levies around it, and behind them, the guns taken from Spain. In the spring of 1925, he made the decision that has now destroyed him. He struck south into the French zone toward Fez. France answered with war. 160,000 men mobilized, 16 squadrons of aircraft, and Marshal Pétain, the defender of Verdun, sent south to direct the campaign. By the summer's agreements at Madrid, France and Spain bound themselves to act together. A one-front war became a war of annihilation on two. That September came the blow at Alhucemas Bay. Some 13,000 Spanish assault troops were gathered at Ceuta and Melilla, 16,000 by countings that take in the follow-on waves. A fleet of better than 100 ships assembled. Landings were feinted elsewhere along the coast to draw off the defense. At 6 in the morning of the 8th of September, the naval guns opened upon the bay, and 2 hours later, 76 aircraft came over the beaches. The landing barges grounded on rock 50 meters from the shore. The tanks, meant to lead the way, could not be put ashore. The infantry waded in under fire. By nightfall, they held the headland and a foothold of 8,000 men, within sight of Ashdar, the Republic's capital. Fleet, aircraft, and landing force under a single command. Warfare of a kind the world had not yet seen in earnest. There is also a darker chapter, which the communiques have never carried. For better than a year, the European press has printed reports, the Gazette of Lausanne set them out as far back as the winter of 1924, that the campaign against the Rif has been pressed from the air with asphyxiating gas, and an American correspondent reported gas shells fired in last year's fighting in the French zone besides. Neither Madrid nor Paris acknowledges it. He did not surrender because the mountains were beaten in a single battle. He surrendered because by this spring, the war beneath him had come apart. Once the combined offensive resumed, the tribes that had risen with him began to come down out of it, disbanding, making their separate peace, a part of them turning against him. By the reports reaching France, he had lost ground even within his own tribe. The supply that had kept the Republic armed was cut. The coast watched, the routes through Tangier closed, the mountain country left to feed a war it could no longer win. Governor Stieg, for the French, put a figure to it, claiming that France had won back some 18,000 families from the Rif cause, and with them 18,000 rifles. Take that for the victor's arithmetic rather than a settled count, but the direction of it is not in doubt. A movement that had begun by destroying an army ended by dissolving from within. And so, this month, the approach came at last from the Rif side, and France held to the answer it had already given. So stood the ledger of this war at its end. On the one side, a mountain people, a few thousand regulars, the tribal levies, the captured guns. On the other, two empires, armies counted by the 100,000, the fleet, the aircraft, and the reports of gas. The mountains held 5 years against it. Tonight, they are quiet. From Beirut, the Lebanese Republic, whose new constitution we reported on Monday, has its first president. The Representative Council has made the choice we then said was coming, Charles Debbas, who takes the office as the first man to hold it. Debbas is a Greek Orthodox Christian, and that is not incidental. Lebanon is a country of communities, Maronite Christians, Greek Orthodox, Sunni and Shia Muslims, the Druze, and others besides, each with its own clergy, its own quarters, its own long memory. The new order does not pretend these divisions away. It builds them into the machinery of the state. Office is to be parceled out among the confessions by a kind of standing arithmetic, a balance struck not at the ballot box, but in advance, so that no single community holds all the levers and each is bought into the whole. A Greek Orthodox president, chosen by a council seated upon the same principle, is the first working of that bargain. It is a way of holding a fractured country together by giving every community a stake in the same state, and by the same stroke of making a man's confession the first fact of his public life, set down before his vote. But there is a second balance behind the first, and it is the one that decides the rest. The Constitution, the two chambers, the President, all of it sits beneath the French mandate, and the mandate keeps what it does not give away. The High Commissioner remains above the new offices. France may yet suspend, may dissolve, may decide. So the Republic is real in its forms and conditional in its substance. A Lebanese president, a Lebanese parliament, and over them the same France whose proceedings across the mountains at Damascus this broadcast has reported through the month. In Washington today, the Senate's Committee on Education and Labor sat to hear the matter of the Passaic textile strike upon a resolution calling for a federal investigation of conditions there. We have carried this strike from our first broadcasts. Today it became the business of the United States Senate. Consider what was required to bring it about. This is a strike the American Federation of Labor refused to back and said plainly why. Its leadership is communist. It was organized by Albert Weisbord, a young man who left the Harvard Law School for the Workers' Party and went into the mill towns with a handful of organizers to build a committee of the whole mass of the mills, skilled and unskilled together. The owners would not meet it. The police met it with clubs, the courts with injunctions, the company houses with eviction. The press of its own county wrote it down as a Bolshevik provocation rather than a wage dispute. And in a country where the word communist closes most doors, 4 months of holding have now opened the door of a Senate committee room. Federal attention that no friend in high places arranged, because the strike never had one. Passaic is not the only strike in this country under communist leadership, and tonight it is no longer the only one too large to look past. In New York, the fur workers, 12,000 and more in the lofts of Lower Manhattan, are into the 4th month of their own strike, for the 40-hour week, for equal division of the work in the slack season, for an end to the contract system. The fur trade is a world of its own. It came to Lower Manhattan out of the old Russian Pale, where furriery was one of the few crafts the Tsar's restrictions left open to Jews. And it remains Jewish on both sides of the bargain. Jewish manufacturers across the table from Jewish workers, and old country trade fighting an old country fight in New World lofts. They have been met in the New York manner. Picket permits revoked, arrests by the hundred, injunctions and strike breakers supplied through the gangs that hire themselves out as private police in that city. Their union is an old one, founded in 1913 and fought over ever since between its right wing and its left. The left holds New York, and at its head stands Ben Gold, who came into the fur shops as a boy and the joint board as a communist. The Federation keeps its distance here as at Passaic, and for the same stated reason. From Bucharest, the returns we said would take some days are coming in, and they tell one story plainly. The government has won, and won enormously. General Aberescu's People's Party and its allies have taken the great bulk of the new chamber. It is a majority of the kind the new electoral law was built to produce, the statute that hands the leading party a premium of seats beyond its share of the votes. We set the principle before you when the polling closed. It did not wait upon the count. Now the count has caught up to it, and the leading party gathers a majority the divided country's ballots did not of themselves give it. It is the pattern of this part of Europe in these years, the forms of the ballot kept, and the result shaped by the rules written around it. From Paris, the killing of Simon Petliura, which we set before you last night, has not stayed a killing. The gunman is held for trial, and the argument over what his death means between the Ukrainian emigres who mourn an exiled leader and those for whom the name calls up the pogrom years has already widened past anything a court will weigh quickly. From Warsaw, the constitutional fight we have followed since the May Rising goes on. Marshal Piłsudski's push to gather power into the presidency is meeting resistance, even from some of his own natural supporters in the same, who will not hand him a free hand without a program of reform to go with it. And from Britain, the coal question stands where it stood, the general strike broken, the miners still out, and the subsidy clock running toward a settlement no nearer than before. From the Atlantic, the Crown Prince of Sweden is at sea, bound for the United States. Gustav Adolf, heir to the Swedish throne, is crossing with the Crown Princess on a tour of the American Republic, and the newspapers have made a small sensation of it, not for the visit alone, but for the manner of it. The prince, it is reported, means to speak with the reporters himself in his own person, setting aside the older royal habit of holding the press at the length of a chamberlain's arm. His first errand in Washington is a fitting one. He is to take part in the unveiling of a monument to John Ericsson, the Swedish engineer who left the old country for the new, and who built for the Union in its war the ironclad Monitor that fought the rebel Merrimac to a standstill in the waters off Virginia. Ericsson was no soldier, but an engineer, the man who gave the world's navies the screw propeller, and who changed for good what a warship was. He died an American. The monument is the new country's, thanks to an old country's son. A Swedish prince come to honor a Swedish hand that armed an American cause. It is the kind of errand the courts arrange to bind two peoples with a ceremony. And this one minded besides to answer the reporters himself when his ship makes port. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night.